Okay, so we're going to start up with exercise 224 today, which is the first of our work at getting line drawings out of Rhino. And like I said last class, I told you I was going to repeat this anyway, but this is important to tell you. When I went back to Berkeley to sit on that panel, I ran into a bunch of former students, which, of course, you guys, if you're in contact with friends that were here last year or whatever, you can ask them the same question. But my question to them is always, how did I do at preparing you for what you needed to know in Berkeley when you got there and you started working? And the one piece of feedback that I got this year that was a little bit different than what I expected is that they didn't really understand the idea of getting drawings out of Rhino and being able to work in Illustrator. And this particular former student said that she kind of figured it out and stumbled upon it and ended up printing to a PDF and then bringing the PDF into Illustrator and didn't ever really do the export. So today, and I did do these lectures, but you're also at the point in the semester where you tend to tune me out anyway. So we're going to hope that somehow I can impart this to you over the next several class days, because I think it is something that's really important that you learn. And if you go to all this work and build this fantastic Rhino model, there's no reason you shouldn't be able to get good quality plans, sections, and elevations out of your Rhino model. So today in 224, we're going to work on the elevation view. I'm choosing the elevation view first because it doesn't involve cutting any sections through your building. We'll get to sections a little bit later on. But whenever I start to work with these line drawings, it's important to recognize that, number one, I'm starting with the master site file, so the one that has everything in it, including the ground and the topo and everything. And before I actually do any work on it, I'm doing a save as, because I'm going to do some destructive things to it that aren't going to be recoverable later. So I have to make sure that I do that save as. So I'm going to start by saying File and then Save As. And I'll put it into the same folder where I keep this stuff. There it is. But I'm going to call it Master Site Spring 2018-Elevation. And so the other thing about this is that these are the kinds of things, because it's a break, it's a fork in your file, it's not going to go and update with changes later on. So this is a permanent, like, I'm making the elevation now. And you have to commit to, I'm making the elevation now. So if your model's not quite done and you go to do the elevation, it's not going to automatically update later on. So it's just something to be aware of, that this tends to happen after the model is relatively put together. You'll also find as you approach the final, or the final of any project for that matter, that your elevations, your sections, your plans don't always match perfectly with what the final model is, because you have a version that's a little bit, you made some changes or whatever. You just have to make sure you get it all done by the time of the final, even if they don't quite match up. Okay, so I've saved this one as Master Site Elevation. I'll go ahead and click on Save. And now that I have this saved as, I need to start thinking about this building in elevation terms, not in perspective terms. So everything that we've been working with so far has always been about the camera angle and what are we seeing, what's the render going to look like, where's the ocean, that kind of stuff. And now we need to start looking at this far more as an elevation, not as a perspective view. So a couple things that are problematic about this. One, we're looking at everything in perspective. So we have to get our projection type out of being in perspective and into parallel projection. I can change that in any view. So I'm in the exterior 2 view. I can come over here with nothing selected, and in Properties, I can change the projection type from perspective to parallel, which is more like an isometric now. But it's still not quite a building elevation, and I'm not going to try to guess at where that elevation really is. Instead of doing that, I'm going to go up to my little triangle here, and I'm going to go to Set View, and I'm going to choose from the front, back, right, or left views as a way of establishing my elevation. Now, if you rotated your house off-center so that it's not on the traditional axes, then we'll have to do some magic to get you in plane. It is doable. The difference is we're going to set the view based on a surface. And I can walk you through that process, but I don't want everybody to have to watch that because it's a little bit more rare. So I'm going to go ahead and work. I think it's the back view. Nope, it's the front view. That is my model. Occasionally, you'll try to get into your view, and part of the hillside will block your view, which would be the case if I was in the back view. If I switched here and I wanted to do an elevation of the back, if I went to set view and I went to back here, I'd have to deal with the fact that the hill's in the way. But you only have to do one elevation view of your project, so pick one that makes it a little bit easier on yourself. Don't try to do this elevation view. So I'm going to go ahead and go to set view, and I'm going to do the front elevation. And I've flip-flopped back and forth. Sometimes I do the front, sometimes I do the right, but it doesn't really matter. Once I have my basic elevation view set up here, I'm going to zoom in a bit to where I can see the bulk of my elevation, like that. Think about rules of composition. Maybe you want it to be more of a 1/3, 2/3 composition. That might not be a bad strategy, something like that as part of the composition here. So I have that set up. I'm going to go ahead and save my view. So instead of the front view, I'm going to call it my elevation view. So I'll go to Set View, Named Views, and I'm actually going to create a new saved named view that is elevation. And maybe I'll call it elevation 1. And I'll go ahead and say OK. So now I have that elevation 1 view saved, and I can start working with it. I'm going to go ahead and close that named views. And I'm going to, I have a lot of different views kind of showing here, not the traditional. I'm going to move my elevation 1 view over here. So I'll go to my set view, and I'll go to elevation 1 so I can see it right there in that viewport. And I'll go back to my perspective view here so that I can work simultaneously with both of these views for right now. So in the elevation 1 view, I need to see what this camera looks like. So I'm going to click on the triangle, I'm going to go down to Set Camera, and I'm going to go to my Show Camera. Which, remember, when I click on Show Camera in the elevation 1 view, it doesn't show up in this view, it shows up in all the other views. So in the perspective view, for example, I can see my camera. And because this is a parallel projection, the camera is a lot longer than we've been typically seeing. You know that little triangle wedge that we look at typically on the camera? It's very different. So this camera now is this big long set of streaks here. At the end of that set of streaks is the traditional target right there. I'm going to use this to my advantage, and it's something that I need to kind of know where the bounds of my viewport are. So if I go into my rectangle here, I'm going to click and hold. It's not a surface, it's just a rectangle. I'm going to do a 3-point rectangle. So right there. And I'm going to choose these 2 points as my first line. So my edge is going to go from there to there. And my width is going to go down to right there. And I'll end up creating that little yellow rectangle. It's a quarter of the size of my overall view, so I'm going to do a scale 2D. Actually, I could just do a regular scale. That's fine. And I'm going to scale from this point to that point, and I'm going to make this rectangle the full size of my camera. And it's not going to let me, so I'll just type in 2 because it's double the size. Make sure. Oops. You type scale, choose that point, and I'll type 2 at this point. There we go. And it's double the size. That rectangle then represents the outermost boundary of this elevation 1 view. And if you look carefully in the elevation 1 view, you see that little yellow line that goes around the outside that I can just barely see on the whisker? That is this yellow line. This is really important when we do the next kind of piece of this puzzle. And so I want to emphasize this. The other thing that I should back up and say is that because this is complicated, I've tried to make this as easy to go back and reference as possible. In the assemblies, which are at the very bottom of the tutorials list, or in the back of the book, 10.8, 10.9, and 10.7 all go through how to create what I'm doing. So 10.8, for example, is here. This is what we're doing today, elevations from Rhino, and it will walk you through all the stuff that I'm doing, and with lots and lots of images to try to help you out. Okay? So I'm trying to emphasize this so that you can learn this process easily. All right, so back we go into my master site elevation view. There's my rectangle. Here's my elevation 01 view. Now I'm ready to actually create the first version of line drawings from my Rhino model. And so Rhino has, we talked about a lot in this semester, the idea of the project command and how that's a really cool command to be able to use, and it's unique to Rhino and is really awesome. There is another command that I have not talked at all about yet, but I'm going to talk about extensively in the next 3 days that I think take Rhino from being a really awesome 3D program to being far and away the best 3D program that's available on the market because of this one command. And this command is called Make 2D. Any view that you have in Rhino, perspective, elevation, section, plan, whatever, Rhino has a command called Make 2D that will take that view and convert it into a set of line drawings, whatever it is. So whatever the perspective view is, it'll make a 2D line drawing for you, which is absolutely fantastic. We're going to use that here in the elevation 1 view. So I'm going to double click to make elevation 1 large. There it is. And you can faintly see that little yellow line around the outside. And I'm going to start this Make 2D command. It's available under, I think it's under Curve, Curve from Objects, Make 2D, I think. Nope, apparently not. I don't know. I always just type Make 2D. I'll find it somewhere. Anyway, for now, type Make 2D. And it's the first thing it says is select objects to draw. I have nothing selected, so I'm going to type all to select all the objects. Enter when done. I'll go ahead and hit enter. Notice that it didn't select any of the lights. The lights aren't included as part of this. I'll go ahead and hit enter. And so then I presented with the 2D drawing options. So what do I want to do? I want the current view, yes. And then I get some more options. The simplest way of looking at this is two things. One, we're going to make a layer for something called visible lines. And that layer is going to be under a master layer called Make 2D, and then it's going to be visible lines. We're also doing something for hidden lines. It's Make 2D hidden lines. If I uncheck this Maintain Source Layers, right there, all I'm going to get are the visible lines and the hidden lines for Illustrator. Makes life really easy. If you've never worked in Illustrator before, this is how you should do it. You should uncheck Maintain Source Layers, give yourself just visible lines and hidden lines. If you've worked in Illustrator and have a little bit of skill, if you click on this Maintain Source Layers, you will actually get, and let's say you organize your building and you have walls and you have roof and you have all these layers, it will preserve all those layers in this Make 2D, which makes assigning line weights fantastic because you can select all the lines that are walls and assign a line weight. So I'm going to, for the purposes of simplicity, I'm going to uncheck Maintain Source Layers, and I'll do this as an export. One of the future ones that I'll do, maybe the plan view, maybe the section view that we're going to do, I'll do it with the source layers, so you guys will be able to see it with all the additional layers. Just two different ways. So we'll start simple for right now. So I've unchecked Maintain Source Layers. I have my visible lines. I have my hidden lines. I'll go ahead at this point and say OK. This process can take a little bit of time because Rhino has to go through and calculate out this view and determine what is visible and what is hidden. So we'll be patient for a little while this works. And so here in the tutorial, for reference, here's that 2D drawing options. Same little thing that I was talking about. So you'll be able to see that a little bit later. So unfortunately, we all just have to wait. OK, so there we go. It just finished its Make 2D, so that took a minute or two to finish processing. And when the command finishes, everything deselects, and I don't see anything. Nothing changed. And so this is the weird part. And that is that I have to switch out of the elevation view, which is what I just created. And I either have to look in the perspective view, which we're going to be able to see right over here in a second, or I can look in the top view. So if I went on this view to set view and then top, I'd be able to see it. In either view, I'm going to zoom, Z, enter, followed by S for selected, enter, and I'm going to see my 2D drawing. And I'm going to show you this both. Let me zoom selected on that. Oops. Let me zoom in here to emphasize it. So there is my drawing right there, flattened out. And you can see here with the white lines and the black lines that it is a flat two-dimensional elevation drawing. It's also shown here in the top view where we can look straight down. It looks the same as the elevation 1 view, but this isn't 3D anymore. It's two-dimensional. So at this point, everything outside of that rectangle is extra. I don't need that rectangle. So I'll go ahead and select the rectangle itself. There it is. I'll type trim, and we can get rid of the stuff outside of the rectangle. Perfect. So I got rid of everything outside of the rectangle. I'm going to take that rectangle, which again is my view, and I'm going to move that rectangle to 0.000. And so this is one thing that people forget, is that I've done the Make 2D, I have the drawing. If I don't move this to 0.000, when I export it into Illustrator, you'll open it in Illustrator and it won't be there, or it'll be way off in space somewhere and you won't be able to find it. So we'll move it to 000 first. So I'll go to Move, snap to this corner, 0, 0, 0. Z for zoom, followed by S for selected. There it is. It's kind of on top of everything else. It's not in a particularly good space. At this point, I can export this view for Illustrator. So I'll go to the File menu, and I'll go to Export Selected. It's already selected, so that's good. I will put this in today's folder. Oops. And today is 2/24, spring of 2018. OK, and instead of doing a Save As type, Rhino or AutoCAD, which we could do, if you're more comfortable in AutoCAD, you could do it that way. I'm going to go to Adobe Illustrator. That's one of my choices. And I'm going to rename this file. This is going to be my elevation, for lack of something better or more creative to call it. And I'm going to also work through my options for Adobe Illustrator. So right now, when I click on Save, I'm going to be presented with the AI, or Adobe Illustrator, export options. And, oh, my mistake. When I do the export, I need to export in the top view. So let me come down to the top view. Let me zoom selected. And then I'll go to File, Export Selected. And there we go. So I was in the perspective view. That was a mistake. I need to be in the top view. This is going to be elevation 01. And here's my Options button. If I click on my Options button, I have the ability to set scale for my export. So this is where the scale. Remember, everything in Rhino is full scale. We need to actually cut things down. So if I wanted my drawing to be at 1/4 inch equals a foot, I would do 48 inches equals 1 inch as the scale here. If I wanted it to be 1/8 inch equals a foot, it would be what? 96 equals 1. So once I've got that set, I'm going to go ahead and click on OK. And then I'll click on Save. It'll present the options one more time. I'll say, OK, yes, that is what I want. And now I can actually open that file in Adobe Illustrator. So I'm going to click on Adobe Illustrator and open it up. There we go. And then I'll go to the File menu, and I'll say Open. Now, I know Adobe Illustrator is not, if you've never taken 135, Adobe Illustrator is like a whole other program that I'm throwing at you at the last minute. The truth is that you could do a lot of this work in AutoCAD if you'd prefer. But Illustrator works really nicely, especially when we bring in the image that I'm going to show you how to bring in a little bit. The other thing about this is I've tried to make this as simple in Illustrator as possible. For those of you that have worked in Illustrator, you can do more. But for those of you that have never worked in Illustrator, just follow exactly the steps and you'll get the same results. So I'm going to go ahead and open up that Illustrator drawing that I just saved. So let me go into my today's folder here. And there's my elevation 1. I'll go ahead and say open. And when I open it, if I zoom out, my drawing, let me press Control 0. That'll, oops, sorry, Control minus. Let me zoom out a little bit, holding down spacebar to pan over a bit. And so I get the viewport boundary right there. The white piece of paper is currently too small because when I brought in this document, my quarter scale drawing is bigger than an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, which was the default paper size. So the first thing that I'll do is I'll change my artboard. If you come down here on the left side, there's something that looks kind of like a crop tool. It's called the Artboard tool. If I click on that, I can essentially drag the corners of this white piece of paper to match up with my drawing. And it should snap to those corners conveniently. And I use the term should because it doesn't always work the way you want it to. So there it is. I've snapped to those corners. And I now have my artboard set up correctly. I've got a white background on my drawing. At this point, I need to fine-tune the drawing a little bit so that it shows up a little bit better. If I look at my layers, which are over on the right side, there's a little 2 stacked diamonds here. I have 2 layers. I have a layer for hidden lines, and I have a layer for visible lines. I need to make sure that the visible lines are on top of the hidden lines so that they show on top. So I'll go ahead and click on visible lines, and I'll drag it up so that it's above the hidden lines. The other thing that Rhino does by default, unfortunately, is it makes the visible lines layer color black, and it makes the hidden lines layer color white, which makes seeing the hidden lines, because they're white, difficult to see. I'm going to change that color. I'm going to just double click on the hidden lines layer. You could do this in Rhino before you exported it. And I'm going to change the color to be some other color. And that will just help when I do my selections for you to be able to see, oh, that's the line that I selected. So at this point, the hidden lines are still all white. So I need to change the stroke color for those lines. I can select all of the hidden lines by just clicking not the circle on the layers, but right next to the circle in the blank space. If I click on that, it will select all of the lines that are part of that layer. So you can see them all highlighted in red right now. I'm then going to go to my stroke menu, which is right here. If you don't see all of the stroke menu, you may have your options hidden. Click on the little flyout, the triangle with the 4 lines, click Show Options, and here we are. I'm going to set the weight of my hidden lines at 0.25. I'm going to also make the hidden lines dashed. So I'm going to check the dashed line, and I'm going to make my dash, let's do a 2-point, 1-point. 2-point dash and a 1-point gap. I'm also going to change my stroke color over here on the left from white to kind of a medium gray, something about like that. And I'll go ahead and say OK. Now that they're medium gray, if I go to zoom in here, you should be able to see the hidden lines kind of ghosted there. Do I really need the hidden lines of the rocking chair? Probably not. But I did the export with those on. If you have trouble with the Make 2D, just go ahead and turn off any of these objects or delete the blocks before you do it. There's always some cleanup when we go to do this. This line here, this diagonal line, I should have turned off beforehand. That was used when I punched through the ground. So I'm just going to select it using the black arrow here, and I'll press the delete key. And we'll clean that part up. Likewise, this little line should go away. That should go away. That should go away. These hidden lines don't matter because they're underground, so that can go away. Likewise, these lines, they can go away. This line here can go away. And so the point is, don't be afraid to go through and kind of edit your lines a bit to get rid of the things that just don't really belong. That can go away. That can go away. As can this and this. This line here, probably it would be better if this arc continue up to meet the wall there, because there isn't really a line there. But I'm not going to draw that line in for right now. This will still work. A few other diagonal lines here behind. That can go away. These can go away. We'll leave that for right now. Let me press Control-0 so we can kind of zoom out. And there's a few overlaps. OK. So it's reading like a reasonable line drawing of my building elevation. So all that work that I put into Rhino is now coming through into Illustrator. So that's a good thing. And I'm making that line. Now, in reality, it would help if I spent some time with line weights to darken certain things up. You can manually assign line weights by just clicking on a particular line. So there's an exterior line. I could go to my stroke. And I could say instead of 1 point, I could make it 1.5. And that would become a little bit thicker. So maybe I'd work my way around the outside of the building, and I'd make a thicker line that goes around the outside of the building. Alternatively, maybe I would leave that building that particular color, and I'd say, all these windows in here, they could all get smaller. Let me turn off for a second the hidden lines, because I don't want to work with them. I could say all of these windows, let's go in here and let's make them, I don't know, 0.5. So they're not so strong. We'll make these 0.5 too. Go. Other windows here, this line probably should go away. I shouldn't have that gap in the building elevation. Oops. Take those and we'll make these at 0.5. Take these, and we'll make those 0.5. Oh, I made a mistake with these lines right here. Should be at 1. Anyway, you get the idea. So the more time I spend dealing with this and improving the line weights, the better off the overall drawing is going to look when I ultimately go to print it. So a little bit of extra time can really make a big difference here. Maybe the line here against the ground, maybe that one needs to be thicker still. So I'd take all of that and say, you know what, that needs to be 2 points or 4 points or whatever. So you can work your way through and give yourself some good line weights, and that will certainly help accentuate your drawing. The other part of this, though, that we can use to improve our drawing is that we can use V-Ray to give us a base rendering behind our drawing. And initially, you might be thinking about, oh, well, let me jump back in here, and I already have all my settings set up. Let me just go ahead and render the elevation view and get the colored version of the elevation view, which certainly would look nice, and we could have it at scale and whatever with the materials and that sort of thing. But it breaks the idea that this is a line drawing versus a rendering. And I think these drawings really should be line drawings. But we can, however, use something called a clay rendering to give us an idea of what are lighting settings, what are shadows, and that sort of thing. And the purpose of a clay rendering is essentially, let me do a clay rendering where everything is set up as white, or modeling clay, as if I just made this out of a white object. I can still see the way that the sun falls and the shadows fall, but it's just a white object. So I've prepped a few things for you relating to your clay rendering here. I have a tutorial right here under V-Ray 8.29 for clay renderings, which you can watch. There is also, if you go to the quick rendering setups, so it's under Resources, V-Ray, Quick Rendering Setups. If we scroll down here a little bit further past the sunsets, we'll get to the clay rendering. So I've tried to preset all of this for you. You can download the VisOpt file for the clay render, and that'll let you just load all the settings in. I'll right-click on it and say Save Link As, and I'm going to put this in my Resources folder and in my HDRI folder. So I'm going to go into Resources, V-Ray, HDRI, and then I'll just save it right here under Clay Render. There it is. Now I can jump back into Rhino, and I'm going to load up that setting. So I'll go to my V-Ray options. I'll open up the O here. I'll open one of the drawers. It doesn't matter which one. And I'm going to load that VisOpt file that I just saved. So it's in Resources, V-Ray, V-Ray HDRI, and there it is, the clay render. I'll go ahead and click on Open. And I know that the clay render has loaded when everything closes down. So at this point, I can make Elevation 1 my active layer, and I can go ahead and do a test render of what Elevation 1 looks like. Sun settings, doesn't matter which sun I have on. I'm not sure currently whether my render was in night scene or in day scene. I believe it was a night scene before I loaded this. So I'll have to go in and turn on my sun so that the sun shows up. Sun's on. My materials are already done. Under V-Ray options, I may need to come in and adjust the physical camera, but I won't know until I do a test render. Let me come down into my output. And again, I'm going to unlock the view. I'm going to get my new view aspect and then lock it again so that I have my exact view of what it looks like. And we'll go ahead and do a small one first. So a height at maybe 100. And then we'll go ahead and render. And this is just so that I can see, is it too bright? Is it too dark? So these renders are super quick, which is great. And I'm seeing some shadow there a little bit. It might be a little bit too bright. So I can come in back up to my shutter speed, and we'll say let's try 200. And I'm also, so that you guys can see this, I'm going to increase the size a little bit. We'll do a width of 1,000. And then we'll go ahead and render again. So there we go. We got a little bit better turnout. That seems pretty reasonable. It's not quite as bright. My building is a little bit gray in comparison because there's a little bit of shadow on that side of the building. If I wanted it more white, I could convert it. I could change it into my shutter speed. I could go maybe halfway in between at 150, and we could give it a shot and see what it looks like. Yeah, that might make it a little bit better. So at this point, it's time to do a higher quality output. So I'll go back into my V-Ray options. And again, the best part about this is it's a very quick render. So I can go into my output, and I can really increase the size of this render. I'm not going to do it as much as I would do for a final version. I'll go maybe up to, I don't know, 2,500. But in reality, if I were doing this, I might go to 3,000 or 6,000 or something as one of my pixels. So I'll go ahead and leave it like that, and I'll go ahead and render it out. This will take a little bit longer to do its render. So bear with me while this finishes up. Okay, so it finished. I'm going to go ahead and save it. I'm not going to save all the channels because the channels don't matter too much. Well, no, I might as well save the channels too. Let me put it in today's folder. Let me go into my live demonstrations and to 224. And so this is elevation 01-clay. And I'll go ahead and click save. It saves all my channels. This turned out a little bit on the tan side ultimately, and I think for me personally, I'd want it converted into pure black and white. That's a Photoshop operation to convert it to black and white. If you've worked in Photoshop before, it's not particularly challenging to do. I'm just going to open that up quickly in Photoshop, but again, this is optional. You wouldn't have to do this. You could just use the version as is. I'm going to go to File and then Open in Photoshop. And let me open up that file that I just saved. Oops. There it is. I'll click on Open. There it is. And I'm going to convert this into black and white using an adjustment layer. It's going to be a channel mixer adjustment layer. And there it is. And I'm just going to convert it to monochrome. I could go through my presets and see if there's one that looked better than any of the others. I'm just going to go with the default. That's fine. I'll go to File and then say Save As. And we'll add a -BW behind this one for the black and white version. Perfect. So now I have the clay rendering, and I can jump over into Adobe Illustrator again. So this was my Illustrator file that I was previously working on. In that Illustrator file, I'm going to go to the File menu and choose Place to bring in that new image. There it is. Where was the black and white one that I just saved? Oh, sorry, I forgot to save it as a JPEG. Let me do a Save As. And this should be a JPEG format. And I'll click Save. Now I can go into Illustrator, and there's the clay black and white. I'll go ahead and click on Place, and it will drop that image in. If I zoom out a little bit, it came in larger than my initial rectangle. I need to adjust it. I'm going to use the Free Transform tool to make this match up. I'll hold down Shift to keep it in proportion so that it lines up with the edges of my drawing. There. And there, like that. It is currently on top of the visible and hidden lines. Let's make it on its own layer. I'll click on the New Layer button. I'll move this image onto its own layer. There it is. And I will move this image down below the other two lines. So once I've moved it below those lines, we get a little bit of a sense of what's happening, a little bit of shadow as part of the drawing, which I think can really help enhance what the elevation view looks like. If I zoom in a little bit more, we can see some more in it, like that. And there you can see the little bit of shadow that's part of the drawing here. So now that I have that set up, and I've got my shadow aligned correctly, the hillside is not perfect. I'm going to press Ctrl-0 so I can see the whole thing. And as with any computer drawing, this is still rather flat and very crisp, clean, and sharp. And so one of the things that we can elect to do in Illustrator is we can put a bit of a grunge texture behind one of these objects. It is something that is optional, certainly, but it's something that is available should you want to do that as part of it. We're getting a little bit more advanced into Illustrator, so if you've never worked in Illustrator before, this is probably not the right time to sort this out. Wait and take 135, and you can work on it in that class as you perfect your skills there. But I do have it written out here should you end up deciding you want, let's see where it is. Yep, right here. You can do Illustrator 3.10 background texture, which will walk you through how to create the background texture. I'm going to go ahead and do it live for you as well, but again, if it's beyond your skill level, then don't worry about it. I just like to show it. On the Layers palette here under Layer 3, I'm going to select that file that I just brought in, the clay render texture. I'm going to go to the transparency window, and I'm going to click on the Make Mask button. There it is. And by default, everything shows up in black here as the Make Mask, and I lost the gray in the background and some of the shadows and stuff as part of the building. In this mask, so I've gone from the image to the mask. I'm going to click on the mask. I'm going to go to File and then Place, and this is where I'm going to drop in some kind of a grunge texture behind. So I have some already saved on my flash drive so that I don't have to go look for them. They're in my Resources folder under something called Grunge Textures. And if you took 135, you remember that I save these. I tend to save these for later on. I'm going to go ahead and drop one of these in. Let's do the wrinkle paper, for example. There it is. I'm going to make this big enough. Let me press Control minus so that it fills up the whole page. That gives me just a little bit of texture. You guys can't really see it, can you? No, it's too bad. It looks nice and subtle. Let me pick something that's a little bit more aggressive and see if I can bring something better in. I don't know if any of these are going to show up aggressive enough. No, I don't think so. Well, you'll have to trust me that it shows up and adds a little bit more texture on it. I'm trying to think if there's anything I can do to make it stronger for you to be able to see. No, I can't. Maybe I can duplicate the layer. Let me change this to multiply. I'm just trying to make it so that you guys can see it on the screen. There it is with the texture behind it. It's in this state it's too dark, the shadows are too punchy, but it's the kind of thing with this texture in the background that can really kind of enhance the drawing overall. Just a little bit of texture behind. Could be just the texture of paper or something like that. You'll see it when you go to do it, if you go to do it, that it can make a difference. I'm going to go ahead and turn off those other pieces. There we go, so I keep it on the subtle side. And I now have my line drawing with my clay rendering behind, which is showing up nicely, not for you guys, but for me on screen. So that's the process. This is the simplest one to do the elevation view. When we start to get into plans and sections, we're going to have to cut up our model a bit, and so that'll add to this. But you'll also have 2 more days of me talking through these line drawings and how they work. So it's the kind of thing that I would like you to try to do today. I know a lot of you are still working on trying to finish up the model, but we're at the point in the semester where it's kind of time to start working on these drawings, get those final renderings done. The other thing that I've noticed is that many people are stopping posting things. And this happens at this time in the semester because you work here all day and then you didn't really do what I told you to do, but you were working the whole time, and you're like, oh, well, I'll just post it eventually. And you move on, and then the next day comes and you say, oh, well, I'll just post it eventually. I would rather have you post something unrelated to exactly what I asked for. So today we're doing the elevation views. If you worked on your renderings all day and you got a really good exterior day rendering, just post that under exercise 224. You were here, you were working, you deserve credit for being here during lab. You're going to get that credit. That's better than not posting something. So please post something on each of these exercises. But if you don't try to do the elevation view, the plan view, and the section views in the subsequent 2 weeks, the 4 class days that are left, you'll end up trying to do this right before the final, because remember that 2 of those 3 drawings are required for the final. You'll end up trying to do it, the weekend before or on Sunday night at midnight because you've put it off or whatever, and it's not going to turn out. So I'd rather have you try to do it now, even if your building evolves a little bit more in the process. Okay? So recognize there's 4 class days left, including today. That means there's only 3 lectures left that I'm going to give you. And then Monday the 21st is the day all of this is due. You need to print out 11 by 17s for me. in paper version. I will grade the online stuff. So if the print doesn't turn out quite right, that's okay. But I like to keep all the prints as kind of a rolling collection of work. I'll bring out some of the ones from previous semesters so that you can see them in there. But it should be 4 images: exterior and interior day renderings, exterior and interior night renderings, and a plan and a section, or an elevation and a section, or a plan and a whatever the combination is. You get the idea. 2 of those 3 drawings. 2 of plan, section, and elevation. You pick. Are there any questions? No? Okay.